Thank you. Good day, Odense. That's the extent of my Danish. The lecture will be in English. Sadly, my Danish is not that good. Right, who am I? My name is Gary Heseltine, and I'm a serving detective constable in the United Kingdom. I've been a police officer now for over 22 years, and I've been a detective for the last 16 years. I've worked on all manner of inquiries, from murder, manslaughter, rape, you name it, I've pretty well done it. I was also involved in the 7/7 London bombings in a peripheral way, interviewing first responders who went to the scenes of the 4 bombs. So I've also worked on a couple of major train rail disasters in the past. So I've got quite an extensive knowledge on what should be evidence, and after 22 years of being a police officer, if I don't know what evidence is, I really should be shot. So what I'll be showing you and talking about is evidence. Why did I get involved in this subject? Well, it's a long story, but my primary reason why I had an interest in the subject is because when I was 15 years old, I had a UFO sighting. And basically, I was walking my then girlfriend home. We were walking down a long, narrow footpath that was between a high school fields on one side and garden allotments, garden areas on the other side. And there were no street lights, it was just a path at that time. No fences then, there is now. And as we were walking along this path, it was a lovely summer's night, August, cloudless. There were thousands of stars out, as you can see, on a balmy summer's night. And then we see what I can only describe as a bright white light, much bigger than any star, moving across at this sort of angle, 60-degree angle, moving from our right to left. Now, as we were on the path, which was going that way, the object came across and effectively went past us, so we were then behind it. There was housing in the distance. No sooner did the object get past us, and therefore we were behind it, all the housing in the distance, power cut. The entire housing went off. The girl I was with, rightly or wrongly, became frightened and associated with that object with triggering a power cut. Sounds ludicrous. We watched. The object continued on further, away from us, second power cut of housing behind its flight path. At the time, I was pushing my bicycle. You have lots of bicycles in Denmark. And I decided to say to my girlfriend, get on the bike. 2 of us get on the bike, and I'm going to race you back down the end of the alleyway, drop you at her house, and then I'm going to take a shortcut, because the object's moving very slowly, and I'm going to see if I can get ahead of the light via a shortcut. I drop my girlfriend off, her house is in darkness, the whole area is. I then get on the bike, I pedal like mad, back down the same alleyway, and effectively the object was on my right. And I end up with this bizarre situation where I move from complete darkness, I am going past houses that are power cut, I can see the object on my right, but it's moving very slowly in an arc towards me, and I'm sort of taking a shortcut. And eventually I get to a situation near my home where the object is now on my right shoulder, and I am moving from darkness ahead of the light into the light of all the housing that's still on, ahead of the object. So now I move from darkness into light, I go around 2 corners, I drop my bike outside my house, I run into the house, into the living room, see my parents and say, come outside, I think there's going to be a power cut. I think there's this light going to cause a power cut. And they just look at me as if to say, what? As you would. They don't come out. So I run through the hall, through the kitchen, out into the back garden. I then look back at the house. to see the object just in time coming over my rooftop. I put my arm up, and guess what? When the object goes over my arm, and therefore I'm past it, and it's behind me, I'm behind it, the whole area goes into a power cut. So it's at that point there that I realised that from a second geographical position, i.e. I'd moved to a different position, how can I predict a power cut? I can't. So at that point there, from a second geographical position, I realised that in some way that light must have interacted with the power grid. Because how could I predict it otherwise? I was 15 years old. My house wasn't on the telephone then in 1975. Who do you report it to anyway? Does anybody here really know? It's not one of those subjects that you just go, oh, I'll just go to the shop and report this. I didn't even look in the newspaper the next day. My parents just put it down to a coincidence. But it stayed with me. And in 1975, realistically, the only thing that I could do was to look. It was pre-videos, pre-DVD. It was really just to look for books. And sure enough, I went out, and in my local second-hand bookshop, I came across a few UFO books. And the first book I came across was Flying Saucers from Outer Space by Major Donald Kehoe. Anybody who really knows the subject will know that he really is probably the father of the modern subject. He put together in the 50s an organisation called NICAP, which was full of military people. He himself was a major, and it ran for many years, and it was comprised of colonels, admirals, brigadiers, you name it. It was a very powerful organisation. And that was the first book I got. And straight away in that book I came across a reference where UFOs had interacted with the power grid and caused total failure in areas. So that kind of reinforced my belief that this object that I'd seen that had caused a series of power cuts, it really was something strange. But a lot of people see other things that are much closer. Just as a matter of interest, before we really get going, how many people in the room have had a UFO experience? Put your arm up if you have. So I can see perhaps 9 or 10 people. Okay, that's maybe probably 15% of the audience. All right. How many of those people that had sightings have actually reported it to anybody in officialdom? Put your arms up if you have. This should be a much reduced number. So we're looking at 4. So we ended up from about 10 or 11, it's dropped down to 4. And one of the reasons why people do not come forward is because they fear ridicule, and if you're a professional, like a pilot or an architect, somebody like that, there's a perceived risk that it may affect your career. Nobody will ever say anything, but when you go for that job interview, people are going, that's the UFO nut, so we won't give him that job. And that's a real reason, a very valid reason, believe it or not, why the majority of people don't come forward. Because such is the way that the media treat this subject. Now she'll talk about the media perhaps later on, and maybe in question and answers talk about how the media works with the subject. You will see that there's a very clear pattern that there is a media suppression of the subject. Very easily to see and demonstrate if you know where to look. Okay. So, 15 years old, had a sighting, looked in the books. Effectively then, apart from reading a few books here and there, I didn't really get involved. I didn't do any active research, nothing at all. I just kind of like had an interest, but nothing really forced me into research or felt compelled to do anything. And it really wasn't until the mid-1990s, so many years have actually gone by, 18 to 20 years gone by, before I actually, my interest in the subject is reawakened. And it's reawakened when in about 1995, I come across a magazine. By this time I'm a police officer. I'd been a police officer from 1989, so about 6 years into the job. And I come across a magazine called UFO Magazine. Some of you who are enthusiasts of the subject will be aware of this. It was run by a guy called Graham Birdsall, who sadly died when he was only 49 of a brain hemorrhage, but he had a fantastic magazine and it ran for many years. And basically it was widely regarded as the best UFO publication in the world, highly regarded. And basically I saw this magazine one day in a big newsagent, and I thought, wow, I've been away from the subject a long time, and I hadn't read books for many years, and suddenly I'm reading some really good books. A Covert Agenda by Nick Redfern. He now lives in America, but he was English. Brilliant book. Timothy Good's books. Some of you will have heard of Timothy Good. Above Top Secret, Beyond Top Secret. And what made those books really good is because they were using factual data. This is not stories, this is not lunatics, this is pilots, this is astronauts, this is radar operators, and producing documentary evidence, the documents that came with those reports. And I'm thinking, wow, the subject's actually moved on quite a lot. We've got all these pilots that come forward and great reports, radar confirmed and things like that. And over a period of time of getting all these new books and getting a magazine every month, I began to feel a growing sense of frustration that the subject was not being portrayed in the media with the seriousness that it should do. Because after all, if a pilot is flying his plane and there are many occasions where pilots have had to suddenly do an emergency dive when an object has come towards them, but you're probably not aware of that. Many times that's happened. There are many deaths being caused with UFOs, military, which is proven. It's not just poppycock, it's not science fiction. Lots of pilots have been sent up to intercept UFOs and have died in chases with them. Acknowledged by senior military people within the US Air Force and around the world. We ended up with a situation where I thought, this can't be right. What can I do? And why me? You know, if somebody had said to me 12 years ago that I'd be kind of like going around the world now and lecturing on the subject, I would have laughed at them. Because I had no idea that this was going to become an all-pervading theme of my life. But that's what's happened. The subject began to pull me in, and I went to Graham Birdsall at UFO magazine and said, I've had an idea for a database of police officers. I'm going to try to work with police officers. I know police officers. I'll see if I can get them to come forward. And basically, I said, can I write an article in your nice glossy publication and launch the database to the public? And he said, yeah, because he liked the fact that it was a credible person, i.e. police officer, somebody people could relate to, not some nutter, yeah? Somebody credible, hopefully. And he said, yeah, write the article. Now that was a massive thrill for me. Wow, I'm going to be in a magazine. Oh, I've written the first article. All that kind of thing. But it was very serious, and in January 2002, that's what happened. That's when the database launched, and it serves, it's called the PRUFOS Police Database, and PRUFOS is the acronym for Police Reporting UFO Sightings. I wanted a catchy name, UFOs, PRUFOS. So there we have a title. Now we had a public platform through the magazine, and away we go. And within weeks, I started to get a trickle of mainly retired police officers coming forward with their stories. And these were people who had sometimes never told their wives, never told their children, but they wanted to tell me because until now, they didn't have anywhere really to go without being, what? You're crazy. That kind of attitude. So that's basically what's happened. It's a strange route. There are many other ways that I could go into, but we'd be here all night. But literally, I have been compelled over a period of years to get involved in research, and it is now a major theme. And one of the things I shall talk about at the end is the fact that perhaps in 18 months' time I'll be in a position to retire from the police, where I can then devote myself full-time to UFO research, more police and other things which I'll tell you about. Okay, The database caters for just two types of officer sightings: on-duty sightings and off-duty sightings. For me, they're both as valid, because if the police officers had the training on how to report a factual incident back for in court, then it works on duty as well as off duty, because that's how your main works. If I see something off duty and there was a car crash in front of me, I'd end up writing a statement, and I'd write it up in a way that the courts would understand, because that's part of our training. So the on-duty cases and off-duty cases, just the same to me. Okay? It's open to serving and retired police officers. I should say 80% of the cases on the database are from retired officers who feel now comfortable to come forward and tell their stories. Some of them want anonymity. That's fine, providing I check them out and I know what their backgrounds are. That's fine. The key thing is, let's get the story out there. But many of the retired officers are more than willing to be named. So if you ever go on my website, which is PRUFOS Please Database, or just put in the word, or just put my name into Google, it'll take you straight. Just put my name in, or put the word PRUFOS, and it'll take you straight to the database. Okay? And you'll see all the officers, chronological, year by year by year, on duty and off duty. Okay, so there's my background. One thing that I haven't mentioned is that I'm also a specialist interviewer. This is my thing. I've never sought promotion. I like to be at the sharp end. I don't like the politics of policing. I don't want to be stuck behind a desk. I do that enough as a detective anyway, but the higher I go up the chain, even more stuck behind the desk. I like interviewing, so I like being at the sharp end. I like the psychology of interviewing witnesses and suspects. So I'm also an advanced, as high as you can go, advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. So that means I'm pretty good at psychology, and I'm also pretty good at body language, which is a useful thing when you're chatting to people about UFOs. Okay, the presentation is going to be broken down into 4 areas. Origins of the database, well, I've just told you that story. The cases, you've come here to hear about police cases, so that's what you're going to get told about in the main. Some conclusions, and then a bit about the future. As I've alluded to already, I do plan to retire so I can devote more time to it, because as a detective, in the last couple of weeks I've worked on 2 rape inquiries and a unexplained package, having to get the bomb squad out and things like that. Every day is different and very long hours involved. That's the nature of the beast. So what could I do? I could certainly do a lot more if I had more time. Okay, before we go into police cases, I'm going to ask this very real question, because I guess the reason why you've come here is because you've probably pondered the same question. Is there any evidence for ET? Now, it's all right me saying there is, but you need to hear about the best evidence. Now, if I was to go to court, I would not go to court with my weakest evidence. There is the best evidence rule in the law of court. And that's what we should always be looking for, the best evidence. Empirical evidence, evidence, radar data, instrumentation data, multiple corroboration, multiple radar, multiple airborne radar, that kind of thing. All is credible, that would be repeatable in any court of law. The question is, are you told about it? And I think in the vast majority of times, to the people on the street, you are not told the best evidence. So the very real question is there any evidence? And the reason why I'm going to ask this question at the beginning of the lecture is because when we look at the nature of evidence, we have to apply the rules of evidence to the police cases. And there are a lot of similarities between what I would call real characteristics of genuine UFOs. So let's get this question out of the way straight away. Do I believe in UFOs? Yes. Are some of them ET? Yes. Are ET coming here now? Yes. Is there any evidence for that? Yes. No questions, no hesitation. Is UFOs real? Yes. Is ET coming here? Yes. Is there evidence? Yes. And I'll start showing you the evidence. But you've got to understand what evidence is first before you can actually start looking at it. To my mind, the evidence comes from the high caliber witness categories. Pilots, military and commercial. There are over 5,000 pilots who have gone on record with not just a 2-second sighting, but often 40 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, multiple UFOs. 2,000 of those 5,000 pilots are military pilots. Military pilots? Surely not. Military pilots who are sent up there, radar confirmed, that's why they're being sent. They scramble, it's on UFO, so the radar, on UFOs and radars that scramble to two jets. That has happened and has been happening since the 50s. And probably earlier. But certainly we know from the 50s. To my mind, they prove, if I was to go through 100 of those cases alone, the best ones, there would be no debate about whether UFOs were extraterrestrial alone, just in that one category. Because if a pilot who's flying an F-16 doesn't know what a temperature inversion is, if he doesn't know what atmospheric phenomena can be, if he doesn't know what a meteorological phenomena is, then his millions of dollars of training has been pretty wasted. And there are also many, many incidents, even back to the Second World War, where UFOs were seen, not just what are called Foo Fighters, little balls of light that followed aircraft all around every axis of the war, in the Pacific, in Europe, all sides, these things were seen, and they were called Foo Fighters, small balls of light. But during the Second World War, there's one case where a British Lancaster bomber crew were flying back, this is 1942, from a bombing raid over Germany, and as they're flying back over France, they see what they can only describe as a disc the size of 300 feet, let's say 100 meters. A 100-meter disc with a row of windows. It dwarfed their aeroplane. There was 8 people on that plane. Now in 1942, nobody had heard of the term UFO. Nobody had heard of the term flying saucer. It hadn't even been coined. In 1942, during the war, you had top gunners, rear gunners, gunners firing from the main body of the plane. All 8 crews saw it. When they landed, they reported it. They said, we've just seen this UFO. Well, this thing. We don't know what it is. They didn't say UFO. We've seen this thing. And basically, an individual report was taken off them, and they were told never to talk about it again. And it's wartime. You don't talk about it again. But that report surfaced in about 2002 in the British National Archives. How many other reports like that? So this is a 300-foot disc. And don't forget, in 1942, aircraft recognition was probably, during the war, the highest it could be. You literally had to decide friend or foe within seconds and open fire or let it go. So suddenly you're confronted with a 300-foot disc. So we're dealing with a very real phenomenon for a long time. We're just not told about it. So pilots, probably the best ever source. But these guys are pretty good. Lots of astronauts and cosmonauts have gone on record that saying that whilst they're in space, they've seen objects that they would describe as UFOs, that aren't pieces of junk flying around, space junk that's ours or Russian. All manner of sightings from astronauts and cosmonauts. These guys are good guys. Radar operators, sonar operators on submarines. Now, for some of the people in the room, you'll know that there are such things as USOs. You've heard of UFOs? Well, USOs are underwater. objects. And sonar operators are regularly, and have done and reported, seeing in military vessels objects streak past there on their radar, sonar being underwater radar, objects streak by at 200 miles an hour plus underwater. Something we can't do even on top of the water unless it's a speedboat challenge kind of thing. Very interesting. Loads of air traffic controllers. I look at planes every day. I look at the sky every day. You would think they would know what to look for. And many air traffic controllers have reported seeing UFOs fly over airports. Did you know that last year in China, 8 airports were closed by UFOs being reported in the airspace? It's out there a little bit if you look about it, but 8 airports in China were closed by UFOs. Can you imagine if it happened Copenhagen airport? Wow, that'd be a big story, wouldn't it? Exopolitics in Denmark would have a field day. That's what we'd need to raise the awareness of the subject. Military specialists. Lots of senior military figures have gone on record. Generals, admirals, colonels, brigadier generals have all gone on record saying UFOs are real. Many of them have said, yeah, we've sent pilots up and we've lost many hundreds of pilots trying to chase these things. These are real quotes. Scientists. People think there's nothing to this subject, but many, many scientists who actually decide to study the subject find that they are drawn in. One of the most famous ones would be a guy called James McDonald. In the late 60s, he went in as he was one of the top physicists in America. And he was a highly regarded academic who spoke on many subjects, and he was one of the top people in his field. And he did a study in the late 60s, and within 6 months he concluded UFOs were real, and he started to lecture on UFOs. He died mysteriously 2 years after he got into the subject. His wife never thinks that he committed suicide, but that's by the by. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, believe it or not. But he was a major figure, eminent figure, who went into the subject as a complete skeptic, and within 6 months had looked at the evidence, a lot of pilots, etc., and then concluded that this is a real phenomenon, we are being surveilled. Observer Corps, these are people who are trained aircraft recognition experts. Every country has them, and lots of country Observer Corps have come forward and said, yeah, we've seen that. And they within seconds go, that's an F-16, that's an F-111, that's a, don't know what that is. Yeah? We'll talk about stealth later on, because it ain't stealth. And one of the final groups that I think are interesting, and the one that I can perhaps influence in any way, is police officers. Police officers 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, they're out, they see things. There's probably lots of other trades, but they're the only ones that are actually reporting things and would write things down in a chronological method that would be presented in court. They're trained, that's how you're trying to do. At 6 o'clock I was walking along the high street when I saw 2 men break into this shop. That kind of plodding language. So, before we get into the police cases, you have to have a little bit of a history lesson, and you have to understand what evidence is and where I'm coming from. In my own small way, I'm trying to raise the awareness, not to people particularly in this room, although it's a help, but I want to reach the people out in the street who just don't have a clue about the subject and think we're all Looney Tunes. Because we aren't. Okay. Let's look at a police case. Lots of people have been sent to prison and even actually been hanged in the past on a circumstantial police evidential case. You haven't got the body, but you've got enough pieces of the jigsaw to say that you murdered your wife. Guilty. And that's what a circumstantial case is, and that's how we should look at the UFOs. Have we got any real evidence as UFO researchers, myself, other people who do UFO research, in terms of showing you an alien body? No, none of us can do that. And I actually think that even if one crashed in your back garden, If you told any about it, within minutes the police would be there, within minutes the military would be there, within minutes you'd be out of the equation, locked away somewhere, and somebody would be trying to suppress that. As daft as it sounds. Because the implications for mankind, when that major decision announcement is made that we have contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, everyone, even in mainstream, will say that that will be the biggest moment in the development of human history. To know that we're not alone and that we're part of the real cosmos. So circumstantial evidence in UFO terms means if we have enough pieces of the jigsaw. Imagine if I shatter a mirror, we have a whole thing. But if I shatter it, I might lose 10-20% of it in bits that I can never recover, it's just too small. But I bet if I was to be painstaking, I could probably pick up 80% and reconstruct it. Think of it like that. That when we look at the best evidence in terms of pilots, astronauts, cosmonauts, radar operators, air traffic control, we can pretty much now get the whole picture, and we can say with absolute certainty, if you know where to look, that the evidence is overwhelming. It is compelling to say that UFOs are here now and have been for probably 50, 60 years at the very least. So you need to know that. And one of the things that we've realised, and I've actually brought this conclusion forward, if we look at the best evidence, that's the conclusion. And people, scientists who go into it, who have made the studies, have all come out the same thing. Many scientists have gone into it. Professor John Mack, he was one of the top Harvard psychologists who thought that in the early 80s people were just having a new psyche, a new form of mass psychosis when people started talking about abductions, and he thought, well, yeah, I'll just do a study. After a year of interviewing people, he concluded, and it nearly cost him his job, they tried to oust him from Harvard. He said, well, actually, these people are reliving real experiences, and it's not psychosis, and they're real, what's happened to them. And that caused a storm, because he was one of the top people in his field. So we've covered that. Sheer frustration. So that's why the database is there. Launched January 2002, we've covered that. What was the reaction of my colleagues when I told them what I was doing? Now, you may be lost a bit in translation here, but if you ever watch Star Trek, some of you will get this. So they're all laughing at me, beam me up, Scotty, that's what I think of UFOs. My inspector's an alien, that's a good one, isn't it? Nanu Nanu from Mork and Mindy. Has anybody heard of Mork and Mindy? Robin Williams series. Take me to your leader. Really original, aren't they? So in a sense, on the face of it, and I expected this, that initially, because within the police there is a unique sense of humour, we see some awful things. And we have this kind of black humour. We laugh at things that perhaps we shouldn't, but it's a reflex. When you go into bodies and crash and something, you can develop this harder skin and you laugh at things that you shouldn't. But it's a reflex to protect yourself from some of the things that you see. So you policemen and ambulance people and things like that have developed their own kind of strange sense of humour. But they all thought I was mad. Some of my colleagues probably still think I'm mad. But privately, within days, officers were saying to me, one-on-one, actually, it's took a lot of ball, that. Yeah, I like that. I hope you do okay. And actually, I've seen a few things. And that's what happened. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go into the cases. We're going to look at on-duty cases, off-duty cases. And a couple of cases, one in particular, that could have been a major breakthrough case, but it got away. And I'll explain why it got away. UFO history, you need to apply this before we look at the police cases, because when you have had this little bit of an education about the history of the subject, you'll then realise that you can apply it to UFO sightings, okay? And after 60 years of modern research, from 47 onwards, which is the generally accepted term, the Kenneth Arnold sighting from 1947 in America, modern era, basically 4 types: the disc, the sphere, the cigar, and the triangle. The most common in reality what you see now is the sphere. What is loosely described as a bright white light. Just exactly what I saw. A bright white light is the most common type thing. But remember those when we start looking at the police cases. After 60 years of research, from 47 onwards, so we're now looking at 64 years, we can say with some certainty that there are genuine UFO flight characteristics. And this is where we talk about stealth, or why it's not stealth. Okay? The absence of sound. Sometimes a low hum, but generally the absence of sound. The ability to stop and hover in silence and on a sixpence. The ability to make right-angle turns. There's a very famous case in Belgium in 1990. One of the best recorded cases, because it had two F-16s chasing a UFO for 75 minutes that was caught independently on 8 different radar stations, 3 of which were military, 5 civilian airports. Tracked, locked on by the F-16 pilots, seen visually on the ground, but they never had a visual themselves, it was at night. But they're following the radar, they've got a definite radar plot, and everybody's following it. And at one point, this object is going straight, and then it suddenly does a dive towards the ground, and it drops 5,000 feet in 3 seconds. And this is all recorded on instrumentation on the plane and on the radar, so which backs up that this is a real thing moving. And just near as it's about to hit the ground, it suddenly does a right angle turn. It goes an L shape, all tracked on radar. The guy who did the research into that case was a guy called Emil Schweitzer, and he basically was the head of the Belgian Air Force radar specialist. He worked with the military, and at the end he did a diagram for research called Harry Harris on video. And he's not quite nervous, and he shows the diagram and he goes, and he says, at that point there, when it does that right angle turn as it was about to hit the ground, stealth pilots, even now, can only pull 8-9 Gs. Do you know how many Gs that this object was tracked, recorded, you could put it in court? 30 Gs. 30 Gs, not stealth. Okay? The ability to make reversals in flight. Way! We can't do that. Stealth can't do that. Yeah, there's some weird and wonderful things out there. And yes, they're 15, 20 years ahead of us. But in the 40s when they had stealth, it would have been out in the 60s. When the 60s, it would have been the 80s. When the 80s, it would be 2000. It ain't come out. It's not stealth. The ability to make instant acceleration. Stop. As like that. So many of the police reports describe this. Instant acceleration. Instant stop. Over a radar base. Weird and wonderful jerky movements. Genuine flight characteristic. Instant acceleration, instant. They don't go getting faster, getting faster, getting faster. They go, and then they stop. Then they stop. Okay? The next one, vertical ascent. UFOs are seen like that. Planes start getting near them, they go. Still can't do that. The ability to render themselves invisible, and this is a fairly recent one, but there are quite a lot of evidence now to say that they can appear not only radar invisible, like what stealth tries to do, to paint an invisible picture, or no picture at all, but they are actually, in the visible spectrum, they can be invisible. There are many police cases where, and I'll show you some of the cases, where they're going, yeah, we're looking at objects in the sky. We're looking at objects in the sky. Local airport, we ain't got none. Local military base, we ain't got none. So you're telling me there's nothing flying? So why am I looking at 3 things? Yeah? And many times UFOs have been seen there, and some of the cases will describe this, they suddenly go, gone. They don't go left, they don't go up, they don't go down. They just, like a light bulb, gone. We'll go into some of those cases. Think about all of these things. I might be doing it in a kind of reverse order, But I think there's a reason why I'm doing it, is to make you aware of what we know already. And let's look now at some of the police cases, and you might just think, oh, he mentioned that. Okay, the oldest case we've got, 1901. Is it definite ET? We'll never know. Why? Because it's 1901. Nobody's around. But based on a newspaper report, that's all it is. But I've included it because it refers to 2 police officers by name, and it tells a story. Cigar-shaped UFO, remember those 4 shapes that we talked about? Now some people will go, oh, that was an airship. Well, in Yorkshire, 1901, green glow, it's got a green glow. What's that all about? No noise, what's that all about? Our first airships had little engines underneath. Really noisy things. We've all seen the old footage. Doesn't sound like an airship to me, but we'll never know. But it's an interesting sighting, because when you look at the characteristics involved. This one's just gone on. I've been aware of it for a while, but I'm trying to do more research on it. Again, 1909. I've started doing airship research to see if I can find, was anybody flying Peterborough, England, an airship? And the answer is, from all available evidence, no. So this is yet another cigar-shaped object. But again, we'll never be able to prove it because it's a long time ago. But they're on there because they mentioned police officers, and by name. That was a PC Kettle, was one of the officers. Let's go into the modern era. I've said that the modern era really begins in 1947, and it does. And there was a whole proliferation of sightings from 1947 onwards. There'd actually been others during the war, but people didn't really know what was what. When we talk about Foo Fighters, small balls of light, some people thought that they were German secret weapons, and the Germans thought they were British secret weapons, and the Japanese thought they were Americans, and vice versa. These are police reports now, in the domain that we've got now. Bristol Channel, large body of water, Cardiff on one side in Wales, Bristol the other side. Basically, I mentioned UFOs regularly, and from military sources, well-recorded military sources, have been seen coming out from the water next to ships, suddenly break surface, fly off, or fly around the plane, fly off. And that's what we've got now. 3 officers see a red disc come out of the water, so it's a multiple corroborated sighting, i.e. 3. If, let's just as a little example, if what you've got to remember about witnesses is that everybody's perception of anything will be slightly different. We could have somebody run through this audience now and do something ridiculous, run from one side of the screen to the other, and they go run out, and then I could ask you all for statements individually, and some of you'd say, oh, he was wearing a red top, so he was a green top. Oh, he was 6 foot, he was black, he was white, he was Chinese. It would change, but the essential story would be the same, that somebody came in from one door, ran across, did something stupid, and ran out the other door. And that's what you've got to understand with the way the nature of witnesses. So when we talk about multiple witnesses, they'll all have their own slightly different interpretation, but they will, if they essentially describe the same thing, then it's interesting. Okay, this is a very famous sighting. 1966, he's died about 2 years ago, but this was a very famous sighting. He was on his own, but there's a lot to this case. Well-respected, beat Bobby, policeman in uniform. And basically, early hours of the morning, he's doing what people did in the 60s. He checked doors, see if there were any break-ins, checking that everything's all locked. And then suddenly he hears a noise. He looks round and he sees this 30-foot classic flying saucer, and there's a glow all around it. No noise, or as he describes, a high-pitched whine. But it's a high pitch, so high that you can hardly hear it. That's what I mean. It's almost beyond our audible limits. He watches it for about a minute or two, and then gone. I actually spoke to officers that put me in contact with him afterwards, who said, oh yeah, I know. Colin Purchase, and that's how I got to know him. Somebody else put me in touch with him. And he says there were other things. I spoke to some of the officers that saw him when he got back to the police station, and he was white as if he'd seen a ghost. He was ashen. And what you don't know, and what's not on there, is that there was some glass-like substance found where it was. So 2 officers went out after he'd gone in to check where it happened, and they found like a layer of fine glass-like powder, but within an hour it had just evaporated into nothing. It's like fine glass powder that just evaporated. That kind of thing is rarely seen, but it has happened before. So there's something very clear happened to him, and he's saying 9 meters in diameter, and it's this classic saucer shape. Now, an interesting anecdote, somebody wrote to me and said I might have seen that because I remember this glow, this green glow, and this green glow crops up in a few police cases. And she said, I lived where he saw this, and we were just getting out of a car around that time. She said, it might not be the same day, but she said it was near there. And suddenly my father, I was a child, my father suddenly, we were engulfed with a green glow, and we were terrified, we didn't know what it was. And they went screaming into the house kind of thing. They didn't see anything, but they saw this green glow. Might be related, might not. This one's a good one. This is, again, near Bristol. Now this, can you imagine that there's 2 police officers in a police car, so it's multiple corroboration again. That's the guy. And they're passing a small airport, which is called Lulsgate Airport. And basically they're running past the perimeter fence. There's a few houses, there's like the airport fencing. And then suddenly above the road, that happens. That's just a representation. That's the actual road where it happened. And that's a representation. It clicked on from nowhere. Their car engine died. The headlights died. This object didn't come from anywhere. It suddenly clicked on and it's there. And they describe it as 90 meters. So it's large. It's motionless. No noise, windows down. What are you going to do? 10 seconds they watch it. Blinks off. Car engine starts up. Headlights come back on. It's kind of like science fiction, isn't it? But these kind of things are actually happening and are widely reported. Physical effects from being in close proximity to UFOs is a well-known fact for the people that study the subject. This case is very famous. There's a little video clip here of the actual officers being interviewed shortly after it. This is one of the most famous sightings in Britain for a police officer. There was a rash of sightings in the Devon area of England, which is a large county. And lots of people, members of the public, were saying things. But one of the first sightings that there was this one. And basically they see, as you'll see when they're interviewed, is they basically see like a flying cross. Just above the trees initially. What the hell is that? They follow it for 14 miles, say 20k, yeah? In a high-speed chase up to 90 miles an hour. Credible officers who were vouched for. Everybody said there was a credible, they're not going to make this up. Those are the 2 officers, and this is a little clip. Listen to this.
Tonight, with PC Roger Willey and PC Clifford Waycott, based in Oakhampton, were out on night duty patrolling the A3072, Hadley to Holsworthy Road. Precisely 1 minute past 4 o'clock this morning, they sighted an object 400 yards away from them and at treetop level. They reported immediately to Oakhampton Police Station, where further men were brought out.
There was no question whatsoever that this was a figment of the imagination. It was definitely there. It was definitely either manned by some sort of being or remotely controlled. It was definitely being controlled to view our car road.
You had the feeling it was watching you?
Yeah.
Another case, 1969. This is a good case because this is one where several police officers had witnessed something in the sky and were reporting what they were saying over the radio. And basically, an officer gets told, keep your eyes peeled because there's something coming towards you. So he's flagged up that something is coming. And he sees this. 9 objects flying in that formation, no noise. Well, we don't see many planes flying in that formation other than formation planes. Okay? These are spheres. He described, I think, as pearls. What's interesting about that is he sees it. The next day, all those that had been on the air saying they'd seen it, they all get called to a big headquarters. Individually, they get interviewed by people in plain clothes who they thought were from the Ministry of Defence. And then all of them are told by senior police officers, you are never to mention this again. Why, if there's nothing to this subject? If we're all lunatics. Okay? This is a great sighting that came to me personally. Now this is an object, a huge structured object that's seen. This is the guy, and he's on his own. He's driving from a little rural police station, and he's going to a town called Wakefield, which is not far from where we live, Lynn and I. And basically he comes to a roundabout circle in the road, and on the side of the circle he sees an object that's a diamond-shaped object, 30 metres high by 30 metres wide, by 50 metres wide, and in the middle it's got a row of windows. It's just hovering above the road. It's huge dimensions. And there's an interesting story with this, because he watches it and then suddenly it goes away and out of sight as quick as that. He goes back to the police station, and later on in the night, as he gets back to the police station, somebody in the control room says, you haven't seen anything strange while you've been out there tonight, have you? And he wondered what to say, and in the end he decided, no, I haven't seen anything. Ah, right, well, this guy, this milkman, he said he saw this big diamond-shaped thing. It's a nutter. And when he told me about this story, he said, I feel so ashamed, I feel so guilty that I didn't have the guts to confirm that I'd seen it too. But such is the ridicule factor attached to this subject that he went, no, I didn't see it. And he said, I wish I could find that milkman and say, I actually saw it too, you're not mad. This guy, he worked at some docks, policemen on the docks. There used to be lots of policemen in the docks in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then they ended. But he basically said he was on patrol, and this is a similar story. He's in one area of a dock, walking round on his beat, when suddenly he sees bright white light, 9 metres, no noise, and it comes and stops above an amenity block. Just stops and hovers in complete silence. And then off it goes, glides away. At the end of his shift, he didn't know what to say, he didn't report it at the time. And then just as he's thinking, I'm not going to say anything, another officer says, hey, did you see that thing? And so he went, oh yeah, I saw that. So we have 2 officers corroborating the same incident. But he probably wouldn't have come forward if he'd have been on his own. Again, another case that came to me. This is the guy, now retired in his 70s. And he's basically walking the beats, rattling doors, checking locks. And then he looks out, and this is a fairly rural community, and he sees this. This is the actual sighting, having gone back to the road and then superimposed where he was and got the view. And he sees 3 green, was it green spheres? I think we've heard that before, haven't we? 3 green spheres coming towards him in that pattern. 2, space, 1. And he's thinking, planes. Don't look like planes. Planes. And then suddenly they go, turn away, and in the blink of an eye shoot off, and he went, wow. Not planes. And this is 1976. No noise, whatsoever. But he thought about it in a logical, thinking manner. It's a plane, it's a helicopter. You run through all the logical things. But when people have a sighting of some description of any note, they've gone through all the logical stages, and then suddenly it's, I ain't a plane. That's not a helicopter, that's not a hang glider. What was it? This is a very famous sighting. Some of you may know one of the names on there, Tony Dodd. At the time he was a sergeant when he had this sighting in 1978. When he retired, like I planned to do, he devoted himself to full-time UFO research and wrote quite a well-regarded book after he retired, and he travelled all around the world researching UFO cases. But basically this is as good as it gets in terms of a close encounter, because if anybody in this room suddenly saw, I don't know, a UFO above this theatre tonight, just above us, and we're all stood underneath it, and it's only like 50 feet above us, 20 metres above us, then it'd be pretty real, wouldn't it? We'd all be able to say, well, that's about 20 metres, isn't it? It's about the size of a car, yeah. Well, that's what they saw. That's the guy, and that's what they saw. Structured object with windows above them, above the police car. Wow. And then all of a sudden, gone. 2 officers, multiple corroboration. Why are they going to make these things up? What motivation is there for people to make these kind of stories up that crop up in all walks of life, but regularly crop up with police officers? Come in number 6. Right, I've had a notice now that I guess Pia did mention that we are going to have a break, which is a bit unusual for a lecture, but we are going to have a break. So in 3 minutes' time, I should stop. I'm going to have a break, and you can go and get a drink, and we'll come back for part 2 before you go to sleep. Okay? But we'll carry on for the next 1 or 2 cases. Now, this is one of my most favourite sightings that's come to me on the database. This is 3 officers, 2 police cars, 3 officers having a cigarette, 3 in the morning kind of thing, rural location. What do policemen do? They pull up, they have a fag. In those days, can't do that now. Right, and basically they're in a rural location, there's no housing anywhere, and then in the distance they see a bright flash, just way off in the distance, a bright light. It's on for a second or 2, and then it goes off. They don't know what it is, it's too far away. Remember what I said earlier about objects suddenly appearing? Rural location, then suddenly an object the size of a football field, the width of a football field, shining a beam down the width of a football field at an altitude of about 500 feet, 200 metres, 150 metres. That's pretty close in a look. In that kind of rural environment. You aren't going to get this wrong. It's that close proximity. 3 officers see it, flying around this large object to smaller objects. It's kind of like Star Trek and the old mothership kind of scenario. They actually go on the radio and say, we've got something in the air, and the maid checks the local airport, nothing. And they're looking at this huge thing that doesn't arrive from anywhere, it just blinks on. It's scanning the terrain. No noise. I just like the special effect. But you can imagine this scenario, can't you? A rural landscape and something. You'd be in awe, wouldn't you? And then all of a sudden, 5 minutes later, doesn't go up, doesn't go left, doesn't go right, just disappears. Let's think of that characteristic, what we talked about, the ability to render themselves invisible. Star Trek quote, cloaking is as good as word as any. Sounds bizarre, but that's what people see. That's the officer, another officer who came to me, and he had never told his brother about this sighting. He told his wife, but he'd never told his brother. He says, who would you talk to about these kind of things? So if I hadn't have started my organisation, all these officers that I'm showing you would have never have come forward because they'd have had nowhere to go. It'd have just been in the locker room, in quiet, talking now and again. But now there is an organisation, mine. And could be replicated in any country. I have no doubt that Danish police officers have seen many things, and that some police officer could come forward and then start up a PRUFOS in every country in the world. There is some talk about one starting in America and Australia, and it's basically just somebody who's just going to work within the organisation to collect and get these people to come forward. I'm going to stop it at this one, because the Alan Godfrey case is an abduction case. Just as before we just stop, does anybody believe, if you believe that there is such a thing as alien abduction, put your hand up. Okay, that's actually more than I thought. All right. This is a confirmed abduction case, one which I researched for 18 months. He lives in the same county where I live, so when I started, he was one of the first people I came to see. This guy's story has been made into over 60 documentaries from crews from China, Japan, America, all over the world, probably even Denmark. It's a very famous case, so it seems a suitable place to stop, but it's got some great evidence that points towards a real abduction. We'll stop it there. Thank you for now. If anybody during the break wants a copy of this lecture, I did one with 90% of what's in this lecture, and it's recorded, and it's all the police sightings that I keep talking about and the evidence, and it's got some film clips of UFOs in there as well. Then I bought some along, I think the 50 kroner. 50 kroner. If anybody, I think there's 20 I brought. Anybody wants one? So it's up to you. So we'll see you in a little bit. Okay, thank you very much.